The headlights of the patrol car skittered across my front porch like two nervous fireflies. For a second, the world held its breath, the kind of stillness that comes right before a storm or right after something you thought impossible finally happens. I was standing on the walkway with a cold takeout bag in one hand and my phone in the other, blinking at the screen as if it might rewrite itself into something less real. "Sir, step away from the woman with the bag," the officer called, voice steady but low enough to keep a crowd from exploding. People were already gathering. Mrs. Kowalski from 3 doors down with her terraced roses, a teenager in a delivery uniform leaning against his bike, Tom from across the street in his slippers, and a dozen homeowners who'd come because, well, something had finally gone off the rails on Elmwood Lane. The woman held the paper bag like a trophy. Her sunglasses were still on, even though it was late. The kind of accessory that said she expected people to stand back and admire her composure. That composure had a name on it. Patricia Hartwell, president of our HOA, the person half the neighborhood called Karen when they laughed about her behind closed doors. To me, she had always been a smooth, practiced storm, a clipboard in one hand, a drill sergeant's tone in her voice, and an armory of regulations tucked into her back pocket. But she was not smiling now. Her jaw had that hard, white edge to it that people get when they realize they've pushed one argument too far. She looked small for her fury, and the bag in her hands felt suddenly absurdly heavy. "This is my property," I said, almost mechanically, the words tasting like metal. The officer nodded toward my phone. "We have a delivery receipt here, sir." The driver marked the order delivered at 7:02 p.m. "Did you authorize anyone to take it?" I opened my mouth to say what anyone would say. My order had been made through my app, my card charged, my confirmation number on the screen. But then the teenager on the bike handed me his phone and pointed to a grainy clip that someone had just uploaded to the neighborhood feed. The video, grainy, too bright, showed my driveway at 7:03. A woman in a blazer walked up, glanced at the camera, and scooped a stack of brown paper bags into her arms like she'd found cash on the sidewalk. She smoothed her blazer, adjusted her sunglasses, and walked off toward her car without looking back. I remember feeling the world go slow in that particular way it does when your stomach drops, and all your plans rearrange themselves around one new fact. The officer asked me to confirm the order total. I read the number aloud with my lips dry and my chest oddly hollow. $532.79. The officer's face did not change. He did not laugh, he did not scoff. He glanced at his partner, who was already dialing. "Sir," he said, deliberately calm, "the law treats theft over $500 differently. That's grand larceny in this county. Grand larceny." The words sat between us like a verdict yet to be read. Patricia's eyes, even through dark lenses, were widening. She looked like a person who had been handed a line from a play she hadn't rehearsed. That was the moment the porch light felt too small for what was happening. The bag in her hands didn't feel like lunch anymore. It felt like a fuse. If you'd told me a year ago that a bag of food would be the thing that broke Elmwood Lane into two factions, I would have laughed. My life then was the kind of small, steady rhythm that makes you forget you're even living for a little while. Late-night IT shifts, morning jogs, the ritual of ordering from the little Thai place downtown that somehow always nailed my spice tolerance. I was careful, quiet, the kind of neighbor who trimmed his hedges on Sunday mornings out of habit rather than civic duty. We'd been living in this development for 3 years, and in that time we'd watched it settle into the kind of order most people mistake for community. There are committees and bylaws and a president who shows up both to insist and to be noticed. Patricia had been that president for nearly 2 years, every meeting a performance, every enforcement a lesson. She had a way of making everything sound urgent. The right mailbox paint, the correct shade of shrubbery, the precise angle of a bird feeder. Most people tolerated it with a resigned smile, an occasional fine here, a polite email there. But folk humor and tolerance only go so far when someone starts treating neighborliness like a revenue stream. We'd had our run-ins. Once she came to my door about the unauthorized set of string lights I'd put up for my birthday party. She measured them with a level and an intensity I reserved for server migrations. Another time, she fined a friend in the cul-de-sac for an unapproved utility cover that had been functional and safe for years. Every time she rapped with that clipboard, there was a certain satisfaction she derived from being the arbiter, the one who could say no with authority. For me, she'd always been an irritation. But irritation is not the same as threat, not until the night my delivery was hijacked. That week had been brutal. My team at work was in patch mode, all hands on deck to fix a cascading outage after an upstream provider decided it would be a good idea to update things without telling anyone. I hadn't slept properly since Tuesday. By Friday, I was exhausted, running on the kind of adrenaline that makes you hollow. I ordered dinner for the whole support team. 5 entrees, 10 sides, drinks, desserts, because someone on shift needed to have one warm, steady thing to look forward to. The receipt was a small, sacred document in my phone. Confirmation number. The delivery driver's name, the time stamped. $532.79 seemed obscene to spend on a group dinner, but we earned it. I left my apartment for 5 minutes to check a server rack, and when I came back, the app pinged, delivered. No knock. No doorbell. Just delivered. And inexplicably, my meal gone. In this neighborhood, delivery drivers often drop bags and nab the leave-in spot without a fuss. People do favors. They take things to the neighbor across the lawn if someone's got stairs. Sometimes courtesies happen. What doesn't happen, or so I thought, was your HOA president deciding she is the gatekeeper of everyone's meals. I called the driver. "It shows you delivered to the front stoop," he said, surprised. "I didn't see anyone take it." "Maybe somebody else grabbed it." I checked the doorbell camera. In the time-stretched clip the next-door neighbor had uploaded, there she was, Patricia. She walked up as if responding to a civic duty, glanced up at the camera, and then, without knocking or asking, took the bags and walked them away. She slid them into the back seat of her car like a librarian shelving books. I remember my brain trying to categorize it in 5 seconds. Did she think she was enforcing some rule? Did she think it was trash? Was it charity? The rap that she used, the brisk, efficient motion of someone who believed she had the right, made my skin prickle. I sent her a message. "Patricia, that was my order. Can you please bring it back?" No reply. Of course not. I went to her house because what else do you do when someone takes your dinner in broad daylight? She answered the door with that same sharp posture. "We have guidelines," she said before I could get 3 sentences out. "Deliveries should be left at the porch and verified by recipients. This was obstructing community access." She pointed to a list of bylaws printed in a font that suggested you could be put on trial for bad taste. "You can't just take people's property," I said. "This was charged to my card." "This was community property," she said, with a kind of certainty that made even the air feel judged. "Unverified deliveries must be secured." "Secured by stealing from me?" I asked. She blinked as if I'd offered a radical new interpretation of the statutes. "I was protecting the neighborhood. Besides, the families who live here sometimes receive inappropriate items. You can imagine the absurdity of it. A woman telling me, earnestly, that she'd improved the safety of the lane by taking my pad thai. But when she used the language of authority, protecting, securing, something clicked in her favor. She had convinced herself, and maybe half the board, that her actions were sanitary, civic-minded. That momentum is dangerous because it wears the face of legitimacy. After that visit, she posted a note on the HOA app about a new initiative. Community delivery verification. It was a short post with a longer intention. I called my lawyer, who laughed at first and then stopped when I told him the total. If she took possession of goods valued over $500 and refuses to return them, that's criminal, he said. Document everything, which I did. I started collecting evidence the way you collect shells. A receipt here, a copy of the HOA post there, the doorbell footage. People began to message me. "She took my groceries last month. She took the cake from my daughter's birthday and claimed it was improperly labeled." Suddenly, I wasn't the only one with a weird hole in my evening where dinner used to be. Patricia's curiosity about other people's property had been, apparently, a habit. For me, this became bigger than a meal. It became a test of whether we allowed a person to weaponize rules against individuals. Being the kind of person who's had bureaucrats breathe down his neck for his entire career, I know how paper can slice. Signatures, bylaws, recitals, italic notes, they can turn common sense into a cudgel. The next morning, I walked the neighborhood like a man with a mission and a camera. You don't realize how many folks are willing to help until someone else stands up and says no. Mr. Alvarez from the corner introduced me to a woman whose Amazon packages had been taken. A young mom said Patricia had confiscated a set of art supplies her kid had been saving for school. Evidence piled up like dirty dishes. I still tried to handle it politely. I sent Patricia an email. Please return my order. This is theft. I included the receipt. I included the doorbell footage. I CC'd the HOA board and left the message in a tone that was professional, but resolute. It felt important to give her every chance to undo what she'd done. People will always tell you, give them the dignity of a chance. Fine, I gave her that chance and she used it to make more rules. Her reply was the kind of message you get from people who've convinced themselves that being hard is equivalent to being right. She wrote that anyone receiving deliveries in the common area must register for delivery verification, and that for the safety of the neighborhood, unregistered packages would be held for collection by board members. It was bureaucratic poetry. Of course, she said nothing about the fact that held for collection meant she might personally take them home. That afternoon, I drove to the address of the third-party delivery company that handled the order. They were cooperative but limited. They could verify drop-off, driver ID, and invoice. They were helpful in that way businesses often are, procedural, concise, but unable to make moral judgments. The driver, a kid named Malik, felt terrible. He told me he'd left the bags at the porch at 7:02, saw a woman pick them up, asked if she was with me, and she said, "Yes, I'm with the neighborhood." When he later saw his surveillance footage, he recognized her car. I felt something odd then. The flicker of courage that only arrives when you realize you've got nothing to lose and everything to prove. I began drafting the complaint to hand to the police, and with it I assembled the folder that would become my small, stubborn Bible, receipts, the footage, screenshots of posts where she celebrated her community collection initiative, statements from folks she'd taken items from. The folder grew fat quickly. On Tuesday night, I went to the community meeting with that folder under my arm. Patricia took her position at the front like a captain on a bridge. Her supporters, two women who had benefited from her neighborhood watch, and a particularly eager maintenance man who liked having directives, sat close, nodding in time with her sentences. People in the back shuffled. Some were curious, some anxious. When it was my turn, I stood up and spoke plainly. I recited the facts, the receipts, the doorbell footage. I offered the names of neighbors who had been affected. I watched Patricia's face as information landed, a color drain, then a tightening. She tried to redirect. This was about safety, about community standards. But evidence is stubborn. It sticks to the truth. The board voted to open an inquiry. That should have been the end of procedural drama. Instead, it ignited something else. Either she would apologize and return the goods, or she would double down. She chose the latter. 2 days later, she sent out a message to the entire HOA, reminding people of the new policy, and in the same breath accusing me of escalating a small civic procedure into a personal vendetta. She did not return the food. I filed the police report that afternoon. The officer who took it listened to my retelling, took my evidence, and told me plainly that they would look into possible grand larceny, and that for a criminal case, they would need to verify intent and value, and whether the accused knowingly deprived the owner of the property. He did not promise arrests. He promised process. Process is a slow machine, but it was the machine that could take a woman accustomed to speaking and make her accountable to laws she had ignored. For the first week, there was radio silence. Patricia posted a cheery picture of herself at a fundraising bake sale. The board convened a subcommittee to review delivery policy. I knew how these things worked. They slow you down with bureaucracy in the hope you go away. But the neighborhood's sentiment had shifted. People started to bring up other items. Fines that had hung like storm clouds over families. Threats that had left folks acquiescent. Stories circulated. The folder I'd stuffed with receipts and videos had a heartbeat now. It was more than just my takeout. Then, out of nowhere, the neighborhood app lit up with a live video link. It was from Malik, the driver, who had uploaded full footage to the cloud, not the clip someone had used for the doorbell camera, but the driver's dash cam and the store's CCTV. The files were larger, clearer, and damning. In one clip, you could see Patricia approach, lift the bags into her arms, and walk to her car. In another, you could see her opening the bags later. A cascade of plastic containers spread across her kitchen counter. Neighbors started to show up on my doorstep with statements. "She took my garlic bread," said one. "She took a wedding cake," said another. A mother hugged me and said, "You gave us courage to tell the truth." Courage is contagious. I started feeling braver than I had a right to. On a Thursday, officers arrived with a warrant. They showed me the paperwork, and for a moment the world felt like a scale finally being balanced. I wasn't sure what would happen when they knocked on Patricia's door. I only knew it felt like time for consequences to stop being theoretical. When the officers knocked, she opened the door with a smile that was trying to be wide and casual. That smile wilted when they read her the allegation. She tried to speak to claim misunderstanding, but the officers were calm and used language that cut like a knife. Taking property you know belongs to someone else, and retaining it knowing the value exceeds $500 is a crime. What happened next was strange and painfully public. Patricia tried to assert her office. She said she had authority to collect unverified deliveries. She gestured to bylaws and community safety. The officers listened, then asked if she had messaged or posted anything suggesting she had taken possession for herself. She did. They held up her posts. They held up the driver's footage. When they handcuffed her, she still tried to brandish rhetoric about community protection. One officer told her gently, "Community safety doesn't mean taking other people's property." There's a surreal clarity to being present when someone's performance collapses into reality. Patricia had always staged her role to perfection, clipped emails, curated inspections, a practiced, indignant tone to rally allies. Arrest stripped the set away. The cameras we joked about now switched angles. 911 had become a punctuation mark at the end of her authority. In the holding room, she maintained a stare that tried to find me, to anchor itself in our shared street. She mouthed words I couldn't hear. Neighbors came, some to watch, some to hold witness statements, others out of a thorny curiosity. Parents clutched children. Someone quietly recorded on their phone. The prosecutor took a look at the evidence and charged her with grand larceny and several counts of theft by deception. The distinction in the statute was precise. Knowingly depriving an owner of property over $500 elevates the theft charge. In layman's terms, taking someone's order for dinner, if the value crosses that threshold, becomes a felony. It's not about pizza or pad thai anymore. It's about whether someone can use power to take things and expect the law not to notice. In court, the defense tried strategy after strategy. They argued she believed she was acting in the community's interest. They produced testimonials from a couple of folks who swore she'd been protective and prudent. But the prosecution had receipts, literal ones. The invoices, the video evidence, bank statements tracing purchases to her house, and statements from residents she'd taken things from. During cross-examination, the prosecutor asked the maintenance man, who had previously been an eager nodder in HOA meetings, to recount the times Patricia had asked him to clear the porch of packages. The man's discomfort was visible. He had a memory of being excited to have a boss, but then waking up to the moral weight of being part of an offense. "She told me to take things that looked like they didn't belong to residents," he admitted, eyes downcast. That admission, coming from an ally, cut deeper than any video. Neighbors testified with dignity. A woman whose husband had been ill described the pain of waiting for medicine that never arrived because Patricia had collected it. A father described his daughter's ruined birthday cake. Their stories had no flourish, just the tiredness of people who had been wronged. The jury listened. They looked at the law, at the evidence, and at the pictures of Patricia's kitchen with bags open on the counter. It felt absurd to see her in the photographs of her own home, an authority figure reduced to evidence. The verdict came quicker than I expected. Guilty. When the judge read the sentence, Patricia's face turned every color of regret people use in novels. She received a sentence that balanced punishment with an eye toward rehabilitation. Time to reflect, substantial restitution to the families, community service, and probation. The theft charges carried jail time potential, and while she didn't get the maximum, she did get jail. There would be a record now that could not be scrubbed by press releases or curated charm. In the weeks after the case, I watched the ripples. The HOA looked different. Meetings changed tone. The board that had once swallowed her rhetoric now focused on clarity, better bylaws, more transparent processes, and stronger checks on who had authority to act on behalf of the community. People who had been silent before started to speak. The maintenance man resigned and later apologized in person to those he'd helped wrong. Patricia's marriage, always cloaked in polite distance, strained. Gossip whispered she'd lost clients at her job and that people she'd once boasted to now avoided her. There are strange, small satisfactions in justice. I'm not reveling in anyone's fall. I know what humiliation feels like. But there is a structural, cold pleasure in knowing the system can function when bent. The most important part of it was not the headline or the laughter of some neighbors. It was the return of things to rightful owners and the knowledge that self-appointed power could not, without consequence, become a weapon. After the trial, Elmwood Lane started to heal. We had a new slate of HOA officers, people who took meeting minutes and distributed them publicly, people who thought twice before assuming they could enforce. There were apologies, too many to a few and not enough to others. Patricia's properties would be sold eventually. I caught glimpses of a for-sale sign being planted in her yard one afternoon, the lawn looking suddenly ordinary and less sculpted. The final settlement included restitution. The families who had lost food, cakes, groceries, and even a rare bottle of vintage wine received checks. The delivery drivers got a new instruction. Leave only with confirmation codes and never hand items to anyone claiming neighborhood authority without a signature. The company we used created a secure pickup protocol for neighborhoods trying to balance convenience and safety. There were changes in municipal code, too. A public notice requirement before any HOA official could seize items or establish a collection program. People often ask if it was worth it. The time, the calls, the court dates. They ask it in the way people ask about any fight that's not just habit but principle. For me, it wasn't only about dinner. It was about standing up and saying, you don't get to make private property public because you like the taste of power. I still order food. I still pick tie with reckless hope. Sometimes I laugh at the memory of Patricia, sunglasses glinting as she pocketed a side of spring rolls, as if she was the gatekeeper of taste. Often I walk past her old house with a vague curiosity about what becomes of people who set themselves on pedestals only to be brought down by the very rules they swore to uphold. The neighborhood has a new guard now. A woman with a sensible cardigan chairs the meetings. We have a newsletter that reads like late-stage optimism. We will be more transparent. Kids ride bikes on Elmwood Lane again without fear of a clipboard-wielding enforcer. People have saved their receipts in a small binder now, and sometimes we joke about the binder amongst ourselves like a talisman, proof, as if the thing that can save you is just the small line of digits at the bottom of a receipt. As for Patricia, she served her time. She paid restitution. She attended community service programs, mostly working with food banks, the poetic rehab that put her in places she used to rationalize taking from. For me, the whole thing closed the way most good stories do, with small repairs and the awful reminder that power without accountability is dangerous. We learned to respect one another, not because a court told us to, but because we'd seen what happens when one person decides the rules are only for everybody else. One evening, months later, I ordered from the same Thai place. I was at home, the oven off, and the world outside ordinary. The driver texted, "Delivered." I walked to the door. There was the familiar stack of brown paper bags, warm and unclaimed. I picked them up and sat on the stoop, listening to the neighborhood breathe. Tom waved from his porch and shouted, "Dinner's on Elmwood tonight," and the laugh that followed was full and easy. I took a bite and thought about how small things, like a bag of takeout, can reveal a lot about character. I thought about rules, about people who mistake compliance for control, and about the thin, resilient dignity of the folks who decided to speak up. The world, I told myself, is mostly made of small decisions that stack into something you can live with. The rest is a law and a lesson. And when I walked past the section of sidewalk under the porch light, I glanced at the neat row of mailboxes and the new HOA notice board. In clear, typed letters, a new policy read, "Respect each other's property. Report suspicious activity. No homeowner may confiscate deliveries or property without explicit written consent and documented chain of custody. Violation subject to civil and criminal liability." I smiled, because it was long and bureaucratic and entirely necessary. That night, the remaining warmth of the spring rolls tasted like ordinary justice. The streetlight hummed. The town moved on. And somewhere, in a house that used to announce itself with sharpened topiaries, a former president learned to stand in line like the rest of us.